Hello, I'm Evan. I'm the creative lead on Genesis Noir, and I think it'd be fun to talk about the art direction. Um, Something a lot of people comment on, and this is what the game looks like if you haven't seen it yet. Um, Very simple, black and white, noir. Um, and I think it'd be fun to talk about how we arrived at this um, visual style and what it means for development and the creative process. So I'm going to start by talking about the initial sketches that we did, um, our first impressions, and then I'll show you a bunch of the inspiration and reference that we collected as we developed the look of the game. Then I'd like to show you a little bit about the character design and world building, and talk about how we took the references that we collected and built a cohesive language. And lastly, I'll give you an example of the jazz level, which you can play right now during LudoNarraCon, and show you how we took that from very rough storyboard thumbnails and brought it to where it is now. So yeah, starting with some initial sketching. So here are some of the first drawings that I created when we had this idea that the Big Bang was a noir gunshot. I whipped out a big newsprint pad and charcoal. I felt that was a very fitting medium to explore, and yeah, I just very loosely kind of came up with these characters and these proportions and tone. And then after I explored on paper, I opened up Photoshop and I mocked up some simple scenes with I didn't have any interactions in mind, but I just roughed in some what could be an interaction. And this is where it started. From here, I collected a lot of images. I'm a very big believer in process and just kind of filling my brain with too much stuff and letting it percolate. So currently our inspiration folder is around 1,500 images, and we're still adding. So I think it'd just be fun to go through these. A lot of stuff in here you might see in the game, say like, oh yeah, I recognize that, or that idea, or that shape. A lot of stuff didn't make it in the game, but I think it's still fun to see anyway. This is kind of all the, if you melted all this down, I feel like it's Genesis Noir. So I'll just go through some of the images in our folder and geek out about them. So I began looking at a bunch of film noir classics like Bogart here, and I was looking at photography from that era, the like contrasty black and whites, really enjoying the simplicity that creates. And I'm a big fan of Busby Berkeley, who, if you're not familiar, was a film director who created these really surreal patterns using dancers. And throughout this whole process of brainstorming for the game and these early bits of research and exploration, I was very conscious of repetition, of simplicity. What could we use and reuse given the limits of making an indie game? It's just me, Jeremy, and some freelance buddies. So we have to be very economical. And luckily, you can make really interesting things with simplicity and repetition. So here's, like, I was looking a lot of classic animation. This is one of my favorite Studios buck. This piece of animation is fantastic. I'm gonna link also this deck with all these bits of inspiration, and there will be links to the animations and things. So if you want to check them out, you're welcome to. Yeah, just going through. There's a bunch of just images that caught my eye. Photography, like black and white photography, is fantastic because it limits the visual information to just form in light, which is perfect for noir. And in particular, I was trying to collect these images that create graphic lines and shapes. Looking at a whole bunch of classic kind of scientific illustrations as well. These photographs were one of the first things that I found and referenced, and they just perfectly say the Big Bang is a gunshot. And I was so happy when I found these. I was like, oh yeah, there it is. That's what I want to make. This is Bees and Becomes, really great animator. Once again, repetition, trying to make sure I'm collecting inspiration that we can make and create efficiently. Aubrey Beardsley, just great illustration. I love this shot in Third Man. Graphic kind of, once again, these graphic kind of layouts, just crazy. I'm not even sure what this is. I think it's some architectural drawings, but crazy. Also looked at a lot of comics. Kind of love this stuff. Fun music video. Let's get in the link. Links are in the deck, and you can check it out yourself. This is a great illustrator, Kino Kondo. She just makes really beautiful illustrations. Yeah, it's just so much fun. This is like my favorite part of the process, is just grabbing things, seeing how they look next to each other, the juxtaposition of different references, like these old scientific illustrations, compared to maybe here, like actual photographs, or maybe how these spark new ideas when put next to some generative art, like this piece by Raven Kwan. Just more really great noir-y photographs that create geometric spaces. I love how these just kind of create an otherworldliness to these familiar environments. Yeah, just trying to find images that are very simple and compelling. Like this is a great animated short by an animator pal of mine, Dan Savage. Big fan. Here, like using lines, you could do so much. Just the repetition of these ascending lines, or the orbiting lines with a little bit of noise to them. Very compelling. Just trying to find ways to use repetition and explore the possibilities of it. This is just super fun. Not exactly the right design, but great idea. Phil Kaza, these are just beautiful. Classic illustrator. And yeah, I just love looking at this stuff. I am subscribed to so many RSS feeds and Tumblr blogs. The really joyous part about this is each of these images could be spun off into so many different directions. Like, for instance, this image of Mark Antoine Mathieu's comic. I forget the name of this actual comic, but the way that he uses repetition of this environment and distorts it, it could be spun off into so many different ways. What different environments could be purposed, be put into this kind of form? What if you didn't put environments? What if there were props or anything else? Or you combine this inspiration with, something else. The kind of sad thing of making any real project and bringing it to life is that inevitably there's so many beautiful inspirations and ideas that I want to riff on each of these, and the reality is I don't have time. There isn't the scope to do it. In my mind, the Genesis Noir can encompass every one of these images. Once again, the repetition, grid lines, simplicity, the contrast of this character sitting on the scaffolding, the geometry with something a little bit more personal, like these windows as well. It was very similar, but a very different context. I gotta love these time lapses of Earth where the lights even become lines. So yeah, just trying to find old things, new things, photographs, illustrations, animation, sculpture, like this Richard Serra drawing, or Richard Serra sculpture. This is fantastic. Or contrasting graphic design and environment. It's also really fun to look at all these giant scientific equipment, which I have no idea what they actually are or how they operate. But once again, the repetition of these rings, there's a lot of unity with these more graphic kind of inspirations. And it's really well suited to a 3D game where you have this one piece and you could repeat it. So I'm always keeping an eye out for references that kind of can spark those ideas, or new ways to repurpose things. Like this image, there's only a handful of elements, and the repetition of them is very interesting, where they're drawing into this central point in the distance, and the contrast of this spaceship with these triangles. So many possibilities. Or how these shapes and patterns can be distorted or repeated just by turning a shape like this body. Get really interesting patterns. It's awesome. Yeah. I really could spend a whole day just going through my folder. But I think it'd be good to talk about maybe how I apply these. So here's one of the first sketches that I made of these three characters. And this is where I ended up with them. So just a little quick introduction. We have No Man, who's a watch peddler stuck in a deterministic hell. We have Miss Mass, an alluring jazz singer who attracts all who come close. And Golden Boy, a narcissistic artist who loves to create and destroy. Now, these characters were very iteratively designed. See, I even animated this character twice, or changed his design. See, originally he had more of a straight jacket, but it tucked it in and gave him, just a little bit more angular of a design. Broader shoulders. He's kind of a sexier guy now. And this is kind of something that a lot of artists try to do when they're designing characters is to contrast the shapes of the bodies. So for Nomad, I brought his shoulders in and gave him a flared jacket, more triangular kind of design. Miss Mass is obviously all about these big circles, and Golden Boy kind of creates this inward tension of this X shape. So here's where the kind of model sheets of these characters ended up. And trying to like get these character designs to help tell the story. So with all this inspiration that was percolating in my brain, I try to apply that and take the lessons that I learned. And I also try to figure out after collecting this inspiration, figure out the world. So the Genesis Noir takes place in and outside of the Big Bang. It takes place before, during, and after it. The Big Bang is a gunshot, and you enter it and you explore it in order to stop it from striking Miss Mass. With these inspirations, I also spent time trying to build out systems for repetition and pattern. So one of the first things we did in developing the look of the game was build out these spawners, which would enable me to repeat assets. So here, it's just these pink triangles to show how it would place things. But so I made a Fibonacci spawner, simple grid, and different ways to offset the grid, weave it, and change the orientation of individual pieces so that we could leverage our limitations in the amount of stuff that we can make and repurpose it by changing the patterns in the layout. So here's a ring spawner. You could see I could distort the ring, or maybe I could turn the individual particles in that ring. We also created a spline spawner and other things. So these are all like lessons that we learned from collecting this research, this inspiration, and applied it before really diving deep into constructing all the scenes that we wanted to make in the game. So next I want to talk about a particular level. I'll talk about the jazz level, which you can play right now. We've released it as a public demo for the duration of LudoNarraCon, and I hope you enjoy it. If you don't have time to play it, watch the stream. Jeremy and I will be playing it on the stream and giving a little commentary. And I'm going to talk about the visual development of this level. So here's some screenshots from it. As you can see, kind of inspirations from these comics, repetition, trying to construct architecture and spaces using limited high contrast light and shapes. So we knew that we wanted to create a level in the game that's very, very noir and very classic kind of jazz film noir setting. The game takes place across the whole lifespan of the Big Bang, but we knew we wanted to hit this spot. So we collected a lot of inspiration from this era. One of my favorite shows is Jazz 625, which I think it was BBC or something. Yeah. But they invited musicians to this soundstage and just photographed them. And the simplicity of the set, like these lights, very graphic, simple. This was great. And the photography is wonderful. You can find clips on YouTube, and if you're a jazz fan and you're not yet aware of the show, really recommend it. Also looked at speakeasies, the Cotton Club, and historical places, and tried to find ideas in there. Cab Calloway, some of his dancers, for instance. And we looked at a lot of the illustration from that era and how they used graphic design to portray a city. Here's a title sequence from, to be honest, I forget. I think it's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And once again, so repetition. This building is just conveyed through these simple rectangles and just little accents of light and smoke. It's really beautiful. You could do so much with low. We also knew that we wanted to create interactions that emphasized music, and for you to create music in the game. And we wanted to discover ways to visualize that. So these are actually annotations for avant-garde music, non-standard music notation that Jeremy was already aware of. And they're just cool. This is weird, So we were looking at this kind of stuff. And here too, once again, this is intended to. This is a composition for people to play. And if you're a musician and you're down to get a little weird, a little funky, you can play this. But it's just great using circles and lines. You could feel the rhythm of the music without having to be able to read sheet music. And you could also imagine all this stuff animated. Big inspiration. As we continued looking, and thinking about the interactions that we wanted to make, we really started to focus in on classic jazz album art. This era, like the Blue Note label and all these other kind of classics, have such phenomenal graphic design. They convey music with very simple shapes. Like, all this is just rectangles, but you can tell what kind of music it is, and it's cool. It feels animated already. This era, they were obsessed with rectangles and offsetting them and rotating them just a little bit. Just make it jazzy. But it's really confident and smart. And for an indie game, it's perfect. It's very doable. And to make this interactive would be, I think, really neat. We just collected a bunch of stuff. Some of this isn't jazz, some of this is classical, but it's still neat. I love this radial, the solid state radial rectangle kind of composition. Really cool stuff. So we also knew we wanted to create a duet with the player and one of the characters in the game. So all this stuff was just in my giant folder. I wake up and I boot up my computer and I go through my Tumblr and my Feedly and my RSS. And I grab anything that looks cool and I throw it in my giant folder. And at the beginning of every brainstorming of each level, I would comb through it and try to find relevant images. So these were just all images that seemed like some kind of union of these characters, like improvising together or connecting in that intangible way that you do when you play music and you jam with another creative person. So from this point, we created a very, very rough storyboard. So not the most beautiful drawings, but this is kind of the process that I like to do. I like to keep it as rough as possible, where the idea is conveyed, but you're not seduced into any particular composition or execution because it looks decent already. You kind of want it to look bad. Bad but clear. So we created a storyboard for the game, for the level, and we took that and we created like an initial prototype. So we sequenced it, and we created like a little animatic, and we created some interactive prototypes. So like here's an initial capture of some like brushing interaction where audio is generated based on your brush position. And here's a animation I made in Cinema 4D, a 3D package of just testing how these shapes could be animated and sequenced. And once we had everything blocked out and an animatic and the pacing of the environment built out in the game engine, we could say like, yeah, this works, or no, it doesn't. This pacing here feels weird. This idea isn't conveyed clearly, and because everything's so loose, there's less hesitation to make changes. So once we had these initial prototypes feeling like, oh yeah, there's potential here. It's not good, it's very rough, but there's potential. Then we move on to the more concrete concept art kind of stage where we're exploring visuals and layout and being a little bit more specific. So you see these drawings are still extremely rough. You want to hang these on your wall, put them in your video game, but they're getting closer. So like these are some illustrations that our friend Marcin did. And you can see he even just used photographs. And he roughly comped them in with some lines. It's not super deliberate. It's all just playing around with assets that we already have in our reference folder, or maybe grab them from Google image search, and just trying to see what we could feel out. Or the image on the right, there aren't those photographs, but I'm just trying to loosely rough in different shapes and environment. So at this point we feel confident that our storyboard or thumbnails are it's roughly on track. It has potential, and we want to be a little bit more deliberate. So here, this is I copied this slide from our brainstorming deck. This is kind of where we're planning out the interactions. Once again, we're not trying to make anything exceptionally beautiful. We're trying to rough it in. We're trying to see, okay, what is the right amount of lines? Do we want straight lines or wiggly lines or angled lines? Sizes, scales, things like that. Because then we'll be able to bring it into the interactive space, and it's going to feel different. It's going to feel different once it moves a little, or you could touch it. So the point of these exercises is always iterative, back and forth. Here's just some more sketches, trying to figure out a subway station and different camera angles and things that we could do. So Marcin did these sketches, and he figured out we could play with the track. We could make it dance. We could make it react to the audio. So after we go through and we kind of do these concept art, we'll drop them into our storyboard. We'll update it. Some stuff will have changed. We'll have discovered a new idea, or maybe we'll realize something wasn't working, or we'll cut something so we could focus on something that we've discovered is really, singing. And then we are onto refinement. So we've started laying out the level in the game. We have the sequence roughed in so that you could play through it. Maybe there aren't all the interactions. The art is certainly not there. Audio's not there. But we get a sense of the pacing. And then finally we start to get a little bit tighter and plan things out. So here's Marcin planning out this montage interaction where No Man is traveling through the city following this wiggly sine wave of music that he hears echoing through the city streets. And Marcin went in and planned out, the details of each one of these shots, and the composition is pretty close to what it is in the game. Finally, things are going to look different from the actual drawings and concept art. We're going to bring it in the game and we'll have ideas there. Or maybe it'll just be easier to execute an idea or to try something with the spawner tools that I built that lets us create grids easier than maybe drawing it. Or we could iterate faster. So, things then end up kind of progressing to a different place. And that's what I really enjoy about making this game, is the back and forth between drawing, building it and developing it, collecting inspiration, stealing ideas, mutating ideas, combining ideas. And it's just a constant back and forth where you have an idea of where it starts, with those loose storyboards, but it's going to turn out different. And it's going to turn out better some cases. Some cases, maybe your dream can't be realized because of technical or production constraints. But the joy of the journey is really great. So thank you for humoring me and letting me geek out about all these cool inspirations and talk to you about why the game looks like this and how we've arrived at this point. We're gonna have some more cool stuff for you to check out in this stream. I think coming up next, Jeremy's going to talk about another interaction in the game and developing it, and prototyping it, and it's gonna be great. So thank you, and talk later.